Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things with Chris James, broadcasting from the auxiliary radio station for Arkanasa Radio in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Headless Valley. The show was requested by Elizabeth Gannett 63. I got her message quite a while ago and, well, I somehow managed to lose it. I have a file on all the show requests that come in. If the same person asks for several shows, I would put all the notes together in one spot. This has led to folks with the most requests getting more attention and the ones with few requests disappearing into the bottom of the file somewhere. I am going to try something different from now on. As ideas come in, I'll try putting them in order of date received instead of name. Oops, what can I do? Or what can I say? Canada is a land full of vast natural beauty and thriving, unspoiled wilderness. Much of the wild landscape there is a world full of natural wonders that have managed to remain pristine and nearly untouched by human beings, with mountains, valleys, forests, whole swaths of land that have remained, for the most part, unexplored. If this sounds like a public relations blog, well, that's where I got it. Nearly 38 million people live in Canada. That's 10 million more than live in Texas. Texas covers 268,601 square miles, while Canada is 3.86 million square miles. About 14 times bigger than Texas. Most of Canada's population live within 1,000 miles of the border, on either the east coast, the west coast, or just to the west of the Great Lakes. This leaves huge sections of Canada with hardly any humans living in it. I've been to Canada a few times. It's almost like being in the United States, only a bit more polite. I know a few guys living up there, John Kirk and David Scott. We met at the Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson, and I've tried to keep in touch. In fact, I texted both of them recently, just to see if either of them had been to this place that I'm about to talk about. Unfortunately, neither one has. This unconquered, unpopulated northern land have hundreds of bizarre mysteries. The Canadian wilderness, Nahanni National Park, is located in the Yukon Territory just north of British Columbia. The park is also known as the Valley of Headless Men. The name is not merely a spooky nickname for a remote, mysterious land, for the area is long known for having people disappear, only to turn up later without their heads. You don't want to lose your head in the wilderness. Well, for several reasons. It is widely believed that the expression lose your head comes from the days when beheading was a common form of punishment. If one didn't behave appropriately, it was likely that one might lose their head. So when somebody says try not to lose your head, they're giving you some good advice. Nahanni National Park is part of the Mackenzie Mountain region, located in the Decho region of Northwest Territories, Canada, approximately 311 miles west of Yellowknife. The Decho region is one of 5 administrative regions in the Northwest Territories of Canada. According to Municipal and Community Affairs, the region consists of 6 communities with the regional office situated in Fort Simpson. All communities in the Decho are predominantly Decho First Nations. Nahani is from the language of the indigenous Dene people that have inhabited the region for millennia, and it means the people over there, in reference to a tribe of mountain-dwelling people known as the Naha, who were once known to raid lowland settlements before mysteriously all vanishing. The roughly 11,000 square mile park is designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is full of breathtaking natural wonders and beauty. I have issues with UNESCO. What business does the UN have claiming any parts of a sovereign nation? They claim they're only trying to help protect and educate people, but when has the UN ever done anything right? If anybody should be allowed to take care of a location, it should be the people living there and not a bunch of politicians who are mostly there to make themselves rich. A prime example of dropping the ball is the World Health Organization and the Black Plague of 2020. Fat lot of good they did. The Nahani Park is surrounded by majestic peaks and dotted with geysers, sinkholes, deep canyons, caves, gorges, and pristine forest. There's a giant waterfall named the Virginia Falls, a magnificent sight as water crashes down 350 feet into the boiling water below. Virginia Falls is twice as high as Niagara Falls. Meandering through the center of the valley is the South Nahani River, which carves a scenic path through the park and has formed 4 dazzlingly high canyons, which line the turbulent water. The South Nahani River courses take it over waterfalls, through deep gorges, and across natural hot springs, including an area of boiling whirlpools known as Hell's Gate, before ending its journey in a thunderous crescendo down the Virginia Falls. The South Nahani River is a very rare example of what is called an antecedent river, meaning that it was flowing through the area long before the mountains rose up through tectonic movement. As the Earth's crust shifts around, the plates force the land to rise up, creating mountains. The river was powerful enough that as the mountains rose up, the water simply cut a channel through them instead of changing course. This carving action created huge cliffs on both sides of the river. Along the river's path, you'll find hot spring areas that are permeated with warm air that never freezes. Being in northern Canada, this is highly unusual. This warm climate is home to a lush tropical world full of atypical plants for the region, such as ferns, wild cherries, and roses, which form oases of green, surrounded by frigid snow and ice in the winter. The river is the centerpiece of the valley and is the destination of most tourists who come to the Nahanni National Park. With no roads in the area, you have to hike or canoe to get around. In the areas of white water, you'll need a raft to make it through the rapids. The Nahanni National Park has managed to remain relatively pristine, untouched, and unexplored due to a lack of any tourist accommodations and no roads leading in. The remote park is only accessible by boat or plane. The valley has been steeped in folklore and mystery since it was first inhabited around 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. Many tribes were afraid to settle within the region as they believed it to be an evil, haunted place inhabited by various spirits, specters, and devils. Those who did go there, such as the native Denai people, told of mysterious creatures lurking in the vast forests. They were plagued by the enigmatic, aggressive, and violent Naha tribe of the mountains. This Naha tribe was said to consist of fierce warriors who wore masks and armor adorned with frightening imagery, and they were known to decapitate their victims. Warriors of the Naha tribe were said to be larger than normal men, and they wielded strange and powerful weapons that nobody had ever seen before. The fearsome Naha tribe itself has become one of the area's many mysteries, and as the whole tribe is said to have suddenly and inexplicably disappeared from the face of the earth in the early 1800s, it has never been ascertained just what happened to them. They simply vanished without a trace. A tribe of vicious giants with unusual weapons that took the heads as souvenirs. The entire tribe disappeared without a trace. I tried to find any stories about what might have happened to the Naha, but there just aren't any. When European fur traders first came to the valley in the 18th century, they were impressed by the legends and beauty of the valley. Word quickly spread about this far-flung wilderness, an area that even in the dead of winter was still warm and green. This sounded just a bit like some kind of a paradise. As more European settlers found their way to the valley, it was soon seen to be a potential path to riches, as many explorers believed it to possess vast resources of gold. Subsequently, the region saw an influx of miners looking to either find gold in the South Naha River Basin or attempting to pass through on the way to the gold fields of the Yukon during the Klondike Gold Rush. Although Naha Valley actually produces little actual gold, legends nevertheless quickly formed of the valley holding large stores of lost gold just waiting to be found. Some stories told of miners spotting large nuggets of gold as big as grapes, and huge veins of untapped gold were said to be hidden away in the wilderness. The stories fueled gold fever, and miners, undeterred at the lack of actual success up to that point, continued to clamor to this remote and rugged land to try their hand at finding gold. The thousands of people who rush to an area to strike it rich seldom come away with more than pain and frustration. The folks who get rich are the ones who provide equipment and food to the guys doing all the digging and panning. By propagating stories of people finding huge piles of gold, the store owners and travel merchants would make a killing getting others to go looking for treasure. It was during this era of miners seeking their fortunes among the rugged terrain of Nahani that the valley's more insidious and macabre legend began to emerge, particularly in a part of the park called the 200-Mile Gorge. In 1908, brothers Willie and Frank Macleod hiked into the area to go prospecting just as many others had done before them. The two had packed up their gear and headed out into the wilderness, never to return. After a year had passed, it was presumed that the brothers must have succumbed to some of the elements or any of the countless perils the area had to offer, such as sinkholes, jagged gorges, and wild animals. Back then, it wasn't uncommon for people to vanish. They may have heard of a better location farther west and simply kept going. Disease was a common problem, as well as food poisoning and other inexplicable maladies. I used to know a guy named Bruce. I never got to know his last name. He didn't like most people. Apparently he liked me. He lived somewhere up in the northern parts of Canada and would travel back to the U.S. for a few weeks each year. He was a huge guy with black hair, and he stayed to himself and seldom spoke to anyone. He did say hi to me, which was something, since he ignored just about everybody else. I wonder whatever happened to Bruce. You lose track of people as you go through life, and then one day when you're in my age group, you sit down and you start wondering, whatever happened to all those people I met and got to know? Some rumors suggest that the two brothers had succeeded in finding one of the mythical veins of gold thought to dot the valley and made off with their fortune without bothering to tell anyone. Most people were coming to believe the two had struck it rich and simply left the area. The third brother, Charlie Macleod, didn't think this was possible, so in 1908 he led a search party into the park. The search party discovered two bodies. It took some time before the bodies could be identified. They still had most of their belongings with them, but the two were missing their heads. A search of the area never located the missing parts. Decapitated bodies found in the Nahanni Valley would stir up legends of the Naha having returned. Miners and settlers would find other places to set up their camps to avoid having the same outcome. Was this just a spooky story to tell while sitting around the campfire? This was not the end of the story. More people would have similar death. In 1917, a Swiss prospector by the name of Martin Jurgensen made his way to Nahani to try his hand at finding gold. At first, Jurgensen seemed to have settled well in the valley. He built a cabin and ran a small mining operation, and he was generally well known by settlers in the area. When Jurgensen's cabin mysteriously burned to the ground, the prospector's skeleton was found among the ashes. The locals found most of his skeleton in the remains of the cabin. As they were pulling the parts from the ashes, it became apparent that something was missing: his head. The people dug through the rest of the burned structure, but they never found the skull. When British writer and explorer Raymond Patterson set out to the Nahani region from Fort Smith in 1927, he received an ominous piece of advice, according to Neil Hartling, in his book Nahani, River of Gold and River of Dreams. Men vanish in that country, and down the river they say it's a damn good country to keep clear of. In 1945, a miner from Ontario was found dead in his sleeping bag. His camp was still set up and looked mostly undisturbed. The body was missing its head as well. Someone or something had snuck into the camp while the man was sleeping, severed his head, and took the trophy as they left. Around the same time, a trapper named John O'Brien was found frozen to death in a nearby wilderness with his hands clutching a pack of matches in a death grip right next to a campfire pit that showed evidence of having had a fire in it. Those who had stumbled across the corpse described having the feeling that the unfortunate trapper had been flash frozen within seconds. While the area around the park would be frozen solid, the park itself would remain warm and green. These mysterious deaths are not the only oddities the valley holds. In addition to the mysterious beheadings, a good many others simply went missing without a trace. It is thought that around 44 people have vanished under mysterious circumstances in the valley between 1900 and 1963. These are just the people others knew were heading into the area. How many might have wandered into the valley without telling anybody is unknown. Other phenomena has been reported from this area as well. Mysterious lights and UFOs have long been sighted in the valley, as well as other unusual aerial phenomena. The area is also known for its cryptids. It is a hot spot for Bigfoot activity and is believed by some to hold a remnant population of a type of bear-like carnivore called the bear dog, or amphicinodon. Amphicinodon. Let me try that once more. Amphicinodi. There's no N on the end. Which was thought to have gone extinct in the Pleistocene epoch. In addition to this strangeness, a bizarre find was made in the ice cave called the Grotte Valeri, where the ancient skeletons of 100 sheep were found, apparently having starved to death around 2500 BC. The grim find has earned the cave the nickname, the Gallery of Lost Sheep. To this day, it's not known who or what is responsible for the beheadings and the disappearances in the Nahanni Valley, but their legacy certainly remains in the menacing place names throughout the valley, such as Dead Men's Valley, Headless Creek, Headless Range, and the Funeral Range. Theories abound as to who or what could be the culprit behind the killings, encompassing everything from the rational to the outlandish. Some say that the valley is cursed, just as the native people of the region had always believed, and that some evil supernatural force is to be blamed. Others think that the deaths were the results of ghosts and the mountain Naham warriors, risen from the dead to drive away the white men, and with their penchant for beheadings firmly intact. Some folks believe the Naha may have returned or been hiding in some cave, avoiding any large groups of people, only slipping out to kill small bands of visitors. Some of these theories include mention of a secret entrance to the hollow earth somewhere in the valley, or the idea that the area lies along a thin spot in the veil that separates different dimensions. Other theories point to the attacks being carried out by hostile native tribes or rivalries between miners scrambling to find the mythical stores of unfound gold. The disappearances could be the result of any number of perils to be found in the wilderness here. After all, this is an inhospitable place of extreme cold, filled with unexplored caves, gullies, jagged rocks, and ravenous beasts such as grizzly. For all the ideas offered, in the end, no one really knows what decapitated these bodies or why, and it is still unknown as to what happened to the people who disappeared. Can you picture a grizzly walking around carrying somebody's head? Nah, it just doesn't work. It is hard to say what lies behind these mysteries. The area is so forbidding and remote that very few people other than adventurous rafters ever set foot there. Despite its status as a national park, Nahanni Valley remains, for the most part, unexplored. There is very large portions that have never been properly surveyed. The only geological survey ever done there were done by the air, and a vast majority of the wilderness remains an enigma. A few efforts to explore the area in any kind of depth have turned up vast unknown cavern systems, caves, and huge warrens of underground hot springs and vents previously not known to exist. Some believe that a lost world full of new species lies there. What other mysteries and oddities does the Nahanni Valley hold? Is there something malevolent hiding out there in this rugged wilderness that could have something to do with its violent and sinister past? Inuit, Indians, and European trappers that traveled through the area surrounding the Nahanni Valley came away with stories of odd, hard-to-believe creatures lurking in the wilderness. Some of these creatures were man-like in their appearance, but not in their activities. Others are what we call cryptids, animals not recognized as existing by the boys in the white lab coats. I'm curious. Does anybody listening to the show actually work in a lab and wear a white lab coat? Let me know if you're out there, or I'll stop making fun of you, if you ask. If not, I'm just going to keep making fun of the boys in the white lab coats. One cryptid said to roam the wilds of the Yukon is a huge snow-white wolf. This ancient wolf-like creature might actually be alive today. The great white wolf, frequently referred to as the Wahila, was a cryptid giant dog reported from Canada's Nahanni Valley and Alaska. It was described as an enormous, robustly built white wolf. It was reported by Frank Graves, a friend of Ivan T. Sanderson. Ivan T. Sanderson was a British biologist and writer born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1911. He became a naturalized citizen of the United States. Along with Belgian-French biologist Bernard Havelmans, Sanderson was a founding figure of cryptozoology. Sanderson authored material on paranormal subjects and wrote fiction under the pen name of Terence Roberts. Based on Graves' sightings, Sanderson speculated that the animal could have been a living bear dog, a prehistoric carnivorous creature in the family Amphisbaenidae. In 2018, Graves stated that the animal had been a Mackenzie timber wolf, Canis lupus occidentalis, a large Canadian subspecies of the gray wolf. The great white wolf was described as much larger and more robust than a normal wolf, with a broader head, shorter legs. Its front legs were longer than its hind legs, kind of like a hyena. It had a thicker tail and smaller ears than a normal wolf. Its toes were heavily splayed, possibly giving it a flat-footed gait, like that of a bear. Its fur was very long and shaggy, and it may be thick enough to stop a bullet. Its tracks were 8 inches across. An 8-inch track would be one huge animal. A 5-foot-long wolf has a 3 to 4-inch track. To have an 8-inch track, you're looking at a wolf about 7 or 8 feet in length. Now that is a lot of wolf. Indians of the Nahanni Valley described these beasts as solitary scavengers which were aloof from humans, neither fearing nor being attracted to man. The Indians also blamed these giant wolves for a number of human deaths. The Nahanni Valley Indians also said they were rarer than the normal wolves, and they spent most of the year in the northern tundra regions, coming south in the winter. Seeing as the Nahanni Valley had some warm climate, the Wahila were able to live there year-round. Tex Ziegler, a cameraman and film director, gathered information on a great white wolf while visiting Alaska. Either Ziegler or another of Sanderson's friends visited Alaska also said he had seen huge solitary white wolves deep in the Arctic wilderness. Frank Graves relayed to Ivan T. Sanderson that during the 1940s or 50s he had encountered this cryptid, which he called the granddaddy of all wolves in the Nahanni Valley. As recounted in Graves' letter to Sanderson, he wrote, "An enormous white thing that I at first thought must be a polar bear sort of wandered out of the trees. It wasn't a bear. It looked more like a gigantic dog. It stood straight up on rather long legs, more like a dog or a wolf. I had seen plenty of wolves, and some of them are enormous, enough up there, but this thing was 20 times the size of any wolf I had ever heard of. By a sort of reflex action, I fired at it, and it was less than 20 paces away and only partially screened by little brush. I hit it with 2 barrels of ball shot. It didn't even jump, but turned away from me and just walked back into the forest. I reloaded and fired again, and I know I hit it in the rear, but it just kept on walking. And with that, I am going to take a brief pause, play a couple commercials, and drink some coffee so my throat will feel better. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. If your house is infested by ghosts, maybe it's time to contact somebody that can help you. Call the Laredo Paranormal Research Society and they'll come by and see if they can't do something about your uninvited guests. You can contact the LPRS at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. It's a bird. It's a plane. I need to get my eyes checked. Where am I going to get my eyes checked? Why, at Optica del Norte, 107 Calle del Norte, right across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Why would anybody go through life drinking bad coffee? It's like a disgrace. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, the best coffee on the planet. You can find them at 4501 McPherson. Or, if you don't live in Laredo, you can order at organicmancoffeetrike.shop. The absolute best coffee on the planet. It's time to take better care of your skin. After all, it is the biggest organ in your body. Contact Lourdes James at 956-723-3019. Talk to her about a free skincare consultation. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. The Wahila is the name of a gigantic wolf-like beast that has inhabited Indian legends from this area for a very long time. It is described as being like a wolf, but much larger and with a heavier build. It is attributed with supernatural powers and is said to be responsible for many mysterious deaths that have occurred in the Headless Valley. Ivan T. Sanderson collected these stories from his friends and thought that the Wahila might represent a relic population of amphicyonids, prehistoric bear dogs, or even the dire wolf. The dire wolf was a gigantic wolf that lived back in ancient times and was considered an apex predator. There have been a few eyewitness reports of giant wolves seen in the northern parts of North America. Many think of North Americas, I should say. Many think these might be dire wolves that don't know they are supposed to be extinct. The experts say there are no mountain lions east of I-35. I guess those mountain lions I saw east of Laredo were just bobcats with really long tails. That's the problem with experts. You really can't talk to them because they've got letters behind their names and they don't want to listen to us common folk. Bear dogs were a prehistoric species of carnivore mammals related to both the bear family and the dog family. Bear dogs are said to have looked like genetic hybrids of bears and dogs. Fossil evidence exists placing bear dogs in North America as recently as 10,000 years ago. Since there are vast stretches of land where no one has visited, it isn't all that hard to believe there might be things living there that no one recognizes today. Scientists love to drag out the fossil record and say there's no proof of certain animals are extinct or never existed. The giant gaps in the fossil records could hold any number of unknown creatures. In order for a fossil to be made, a creature has to die and then be covered in mud before anything can eat it. Then, the minerals have to replace the biological matter. Scientists has to find the fossil and dig it up and then study it and come out with a theory as to what the thing was and when it lived. I consider this a lot of speculation with very little actual proof. Amphicydidae were a diverse group with species resembling all or part of modern dogs, hyenas, and bears. Leaner-built species had cheek teeth designed for shearing meat, whereas the stouter, larger species had teeth designed to crush bones. Males were much larger than females. They lived in dens and had the ability to dig large burrows and stay hidden for long periods of time. Since at least the 1950s, traders, trappers, and Aboriginal Canadians have returned from the northern wilds with stories of an enormous solitary wolf said to haunt the barrel forests of Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. Often referred to as the Wahila, this creature is typically described as having a wide head, a powerful build, snow-white coat, and a size many times the magnitude of an average gray wolf. A mechanic working up north described this animal as looking like a wolf on steroids. He estimated its height at 3.5 feet at the shoulder. The largest wolf ever recorded was only 3 feet 2 inches tall at the shoulder, but giants of this size are truly rare. If the mechanic's estimate was correct, then the animal was at least 4 inches taller than the biggest wolf we've ever seen. Other details differed from a true wolf. Its head was too broad for that of a wolf, and its build was too heavy, almost bear-like. It had pure white fur that was exceptionally long and shaggy. Other reports agree with the general description above, but add more detail. The Wahila, despite the fact that it's a larger than a wolf, has shorter legs than a wolf. The impressive shoulder height comes from its massive body instead of its legs. Its ears are smaller than a wolf's ears, and the tracks show toes set farther apart from each other than a wolf's track. The Wahila are never seen in packs, staying in groups of 2 to 3, and they stay in the coldest, most inhospitable environments of the extreme north, favoring areas where there are few people. Along with all these bizarre creatures, Bigfoot has been reported in the area around the Nahanni Valley as well. The Nahanni is also known as the Wild Man of the North. Indians living in northern British Columbia and the Yukon tell of a race of cave-dwelling creatures that look kind of like men, only they're covered with hair, with faces like gargoyles. These creatures were twice the height of men and had a habit of carrying off hunters and women. Anyone captured by the Nahanni were never seen alive again. One of the first frontiersmen to write about these wild men was Father Emile Petito. Darn French names. Petito, the 19th century oblate missionary who lived among the Slave and the Satu Dene of the North Country's two Great Lakes. In 1876, Petito wrote of a fear that spread among the Indians each summer like an epidemic. He said they lived at times in continual terror of an imaginary enemy who pursues them without rest and who they believe to see everywhere, even though he doesn't exist at all. Too many European settlers were willing to write off anything that they found preposterous as being just local superstition. It was far easier to say it didn't exist than to change their own beliefs. According to ethnographer Cornelius Osgood, belief in the Nahani was strong among the Slave, the Dogrid, and the Satu Deni as late as 1929. When they suspected a Nahani was lurking nearby, entire Dene bands would often abandon their camps and they would seek shelter on an island out on the lake. They believed that their pursuer, for one reason or another, was unable to cross to their new campsite from the shore. According to a Hudson Bay Company trader named John Firth, entire encampments would become alarmed in the middle of the night to some unseen invader. The tribe would gather at the edge of their camp and fire into the woods at any sounds. This was a habit only during certain times of the year. It was a risky idea to approach one of these villages after dark. It is easy to say these Indians were just a bunch of superstitious savages. It is far harder to try looking at their stories to try to find the truth. Those who lived in the wilderness areas and had more contact with the Indians began to think there was a lot of truth in these stories. Most 19th and 20th century frontiersmen who wrote about the Nahani in their books and journals were under the impression that the Deni regarded them as hairy, cannibalistic giants, vaguely human in appearance with red eyes and long, muscular arms. According to English adventurer Michael Mason, in his 1924 book, The Arctic Forest, the Gwich'in of Peel River Country in northern Yukon. Why do people have to have such darn long names to their books? He could have just called it the Arctic Forest. Anyway, he described the Nahani, or the Mahani, as they called them, as being terrible wild men with red eyes, enormous height, and completely covered with long hair. Their tremendous size was attested to by the 3-foot-long, human-like footprints that they left in their wake, as well as their ability to tear entire birch trees from the earth with their bare hands, roots and all. Philip Godsell, who spent much time around the campfires of the Slavi and the Casca during his years as an inspector for the Hudson Bay Company, described the Nahani as a troglodyte, or caveman, twice the size of ordinary humans, who went about naked save for a coating of evil-smelling hair. In some articles he likened them to gorillas or gorgiles, and commented upon the superhuman strength and the speed that they possessed. Many frontiersmen wrote about the incredible size of these creatures' footprints, which they left behind in the snow and the muskeg, a North American swamp or bog consisting of a mixture of water, partially dead vegetation, frequently covered by a layer of smegmum and other moss. Their tracks were purportedly man-like in appearance, yet much larger and narrower. In some accounts, their big toe stood out from the remaining 4, kind of like a gorilla's foot. Although their footprints never bore any nail marks, some said the Nahani's fingers were tipped with long, nail-like claws. Back in the 20th century, the image of a Nahani as an enormous, hairy monster was making its way into books and popular magazines often in dramatic fashion. For an example, the article entitled Cursed Treasure of Dead Men's Valley, published in June 1968 issue of the magazine Saga, maintained that the Nahani were hairy demons who stand as high as a Kodiak bear, are as swift as a bird in flight, and kill all things they can reach by cutting off their heads. Their skin is so tough that a bullet will not penetrate it, and cutting it with a knife is more difficult than cutting stone. The Kaska, Slave, and the Mountain Indians of the Mackenzie country long maintained that the Nahanni Valley was the domain of the Nahani, and that these fearsome monsters resided within its foreboding caves and canyons. This belief is attested to by the region's toponymy, a study of place names. According to Dene language expert Alan Adam, Nahade is an old native word for the South Nahani River, which means River of Giants. The Nahani were by no means confined to these remote mountain hideaways. Many of these monsters traversed the subarctic forest in search of prey, often traveling extraordinarily long distances without stopping for food or rest, usually traveling alone. Natives all over the Northland, from the coastal region of Alaska to the forests of the Yukon, lived in almost perpetual fear of them. Nahani attacks occurred almost exclusively during the late spring, summer, and early fall. The subarctic winter, on the other hand, though dark, miserable, and bitterly cold, was mercifully devoid of these dreaded encounters. Where the Nahani retreated to during the winter months was a mystery to the Dene. Some said that they retired to carefully concealed burrows that they dug from the permafrost, where they spent the winter hibernating like bears. Others claimed that they migrated south to a place where their kind were more numerous. Outside the Mackenzie Mountains, the Nahani hunted traveling Indians, stalking them from concealment in the brush. Ofttimes the Nahani intended victims only became aware of its presence when one of their number, perhaps a scout on reconnaissance duty, stumbled upon its strange tracks in the forest, or maybe caught a glimpse of a dark figure out of the corner of his eye, darting noiselessly into the brush. In other instances, the uncanny feeling of being watched might serve as sufficient proof that a Nahani was somewhere nearby. When a Nahani targeted a particular camp, it took up a position in the trees just beyond the light of the campfire and then waited. Sometimes it taunted its intended victims by throwing rocks or sticks at them. On occasion, the Nahani emitted strange whistling sounds or noises resembling human laughter. Often it would slip into camp in the middle of the night, steal food, usually fish, either from drying racks or smokehouses, or it would destroy fishing nets and other equipment. Legend has it that the purpose of the Nahani's visits were twofold. Its primary objective was to steal women, girls who strayed too far from the camp, especially at dawn or dusk, where it's serious danger of being abducted and dragged away into the woods, never to be seen again. The other motivation that drew these monsters to the camps was sustenance. If afforded the opportunity, Nahani would snatch children and lone hunters and carry them off into the woods, where they would devour them. On rare occasions, intended victims, most often young women, narrowly escaped the Nahani clutches and returned to tell the tale. Those who survived such encounters often described a powerful, nauseating odor which preceded the attack. Others reported being beset by an overwhelming, almost petrifying sense of dread, as if the Nahani had exercised some sort of hypnotic power over them. These descriptions sound a lot like what folks who encounter Bigfoot say. Huge, semi-humanoid creatures with an awful aroma. The smell, people report, is only involved in about 30% of the encounters. Also, the feeling of dread have been reported in several Bigfoot encounters. As for eating people, well, we don't really know much about Bigfoot. He, or rather they, might not be tree-hugging, granola-munching creatures that some folks think they are. I borrowed that one from Chester Moore. Once again, we don't really know much about them except they are big, hair-covered recluses. People go out in the wilderness looking for Bigfoot, and then they come back with stories of hearing things and sometimes seeing things that are probably Bigfoot, and nobody dies. However, we don't know what happened to all those folks that have vanished over the years in far-flung places. They just might have found themselves on some Bigfoot menu in some Bigfoot restaurant. We don't know. I hope not, but wouldn't it make some shows like Finding Bigfoot just a little bit more exciting? As I was doing the research for this show, I thought I would search for bodies found minus their heads. Holy cow, it seems to be an epidemic. There have been bodies found all over the country with the head missing. On further study, the hands and the feet were usually missing as well. This gave me the idea that these bodies were all murder victims. The perpetrator or perpetrators removed parts of the body to make identification difficult, if not impossible. I liked CSI back when it first started. The science was great. I met a lot of young folks who had decided to pursue a career in crime scene investigation because of having watched the TV show. The producers knew they had a winner. Being Hollywood, they did what they always do. First, they made as many CSI TV shows as they could, and then they focused on the characters instead of the science. The show became more like a soap opera. Suddenly, everybody was jumping in and out of bed with everyone else. Their lives took over the stories, and the science took a back seat to the nonsense. As the authorities' ability to solve crimes gets better, the criminals' ability to muddy the water increases as well. Thus, the absence of certain body parts. The number of dead bodies found in and around Nahanni National Park, missing their heads, reminds me of another place where bodies were found on a regular basis, minus the cabeza. The Superstition Mountains has a long history of headless killings. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived on the scene, the mountain already had a bad reputation. Francisco Vasquez de Coronado came north out of Mexico in 1540, seeking the legendary 7 golden cities of Cibola. The Apache told him the mountain was filled with gold, but he should not go there because the mountain was sacred. The Indians were afraid that the thunder god who lived in the mountain, and this god would not take favorably to anyone who trespassed on his land. When the Spaniards ignored the warning from the Indians and tried to explore the mountain on their own, men began to vanish mysteriously. If somebody stepped away from his companions, say, to relieve himself, he would vanish. Later, when his body was found, it had been mutilated and the head would be missing. The terrified survivors refused to return to the mountain, and so Coronado dubbed the collection of peaks Monte Superstición, or Superstition Mountain, which explains the origin of the infamous name. A prospector with connections to the Lost Dutchman mine and its mysterious death was Elisha Rivas. He was better known as the madman of the superstitions. From 1872 until his death in 1896, he lived in a remote area on the mountain, and he raised vegetables in his garden. The Apache never bothered him. They were afraid of people who were crazy, thinking they were in contact with the gods. This gave Rivas the upper hand. Rivas was known to run naked through the hills and canyons at night, shooting his pistol in the air. He said he was trying to shoot down the stars. In April 1896, an acquaintance of Rivas noticed he was overdue for his trip into town, and so he went in search of him. The decomposing body of Rivas was found near his shack. Coyotes had been munching on him, but they were not the cause of his death. His head had been severed from his body, the same manner as the Spanish soldiers had been found. They found his head a short distance away. A prospector named James Cravey thought he could beat the odds of finding the mine by using a helicopter in 1947. His headless body was found months later, tied up in a blanket, with his skull 30 feet away. The coroner reported no evidence of foul play. Tied up in a blanket, head removed from the body, no evidence of foul play. As George Johnston from the Superstition Mountain Museum suggests, there are a great number of tragedies linked to the Superstition Wilderness, and the Prairie Ghost website lists a large number of disappearances and deaths in the area surrounding the mountain and mines over the last century. A shocking number of these disappearances involved headless bodies and mysterious gunshot wounds. The idea of killing someone is kind of a shock to most people. The idea of then cutting off body parts is just plain weird. Mutilating a corpse is considered uncivilized, and taking the head away as some kind of a bizarre trophy or souvenir is repulsive. Who or what has collected the heads of people who are considered to have violated either sacred ground or tribal lands? Someday, some unfortunate park ranger or hiker is going to come home with a story of finding a cave or a crevasse filled with skulls of all those murdered people. That is, as long as he or she doesn't wind up missing as well. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends what they've been missing. I am still in the process of writing a book called Paranormal. If you have a true story of a paranormal encounter, say you saw a Bigfoot or you saw a UFO or a ghost, send me the information and I'll put it into a readable form, and then I'll send it back to you so you can say yes or no, that's how it went or not. You can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. If you enjoyed tonight's show and you want to hear the archives, you'll have to go to YouTube and type in the entire name, Strange Things with Chris James, because now there's about 20 different sites all using the Strange Names moniker. I had it first. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?